Welcome back to this episode of the Deep Penetration Podcast. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Danny, and I'm a love and self-esteem coach that works with the LGBTQIA plus community. And we talk about all things to do with self and love and building healthy relationships and unpacking stereotypes within the community and all of that good stuff. So if this is your first time joining, I want to welcome you. If you've already been listening in, then welcome back. And I don't want to waste any time. I want to jump right into it. And the topic that we're talking about today is codependency, right? And here's the thing about codependency. I feel like this is a word that kind of just gets thrown around all the time when it comes to relationships, just like narcissist is kind of like the new buzzword in relationships. And that's not to say that there aren't people who haven't experienced a relationship with somebody who is a narcissist, but narcissism is actually something that is diagnosed through the utilization of the DSM-4, the DSM-5, which is the Book of Diagnoses in Psychology. I say all of that because there are actual signs that you may be exhibiting codependent behaviors within your relationship, and that is possibly why you are finding it difficult to actually stay in a relationship or maintain a relationship, or it's even possible that you are in a relationship with somebody who is exhibiting codependent behavior. So if you are in a relationship or have been in a relationship and you've heard the following phrases, then it's possible that you might be codependent or have some codependent behaviors, right? So one of them is that, so let's say, for example, you've been in a relationship and your significant other or the person that you've been dating has asked you, why are you being so needy? Or I can't do everything for you. Or can't you figure things out on your own? So if you've ever heard some of those phrases, maybe it's time to take a step back and really kind of reflect on those things, right? So that being said, let me be clear. Codependency, although it's not necessarily recognized as an official diagnosis in the DSM-5, it is a pattern of behaviors that can be linked to a mental health diagnosis, right? So it can be linked to depression, anxiety, personality disorders, dependent personality disorders, avoidant personality disorders, and the list goes on. But in no way am I saying that you have any of these things. Let me be clear about the difference between somebody who is a certified licensed therapist and somebody who is a coach. To be a coach, yes, you go through certifications and all of those things, but we are not qualified to diagnose you with anything that has to do with your mental health disorders or anything like that. So if you ever come across a coach who is trying to diagnose you or is telling you that you are exhibiting behaviors of X, Y, and Z, and they're giving you recommendations in regards to how to treat it, red flag. Do not listen to them, essentially, because they are not licensed. Now, it's possible that they may be a licensed therapist and they are practicing as a coach. That's a little bit different. But, if you have a coach who's telling you, hey, this is what you have, just be a little bit cognizant and a little bit weary of that. So, again, in no way am I saying that you have any of these things. And if there is a concern that you do, I would recommend seeking a licensed psychotherapist, like I said, or even just a therapist to evaluate you. And the reason I bring it up is because I feel that the term codependency, like I said in the beginning, it's become a buzzword and it's used so flippantly, like the term narcissist. But it's incredibly important that you recognize the differences and not use those terms that don't actually apply to yourself, to your partner, or to anybody else. So as a love and a self-esteem coach, I have worked with many, many, many people who display codependent patterns of behavior. And half of them are aware and the other half have no clue. So what are some of the common signs that you may be with somebody or you yourself are codependent? So there was an article that was published in Psychology Today, right? And it was titled um, "How to Conquer Codependency." And in this article, they listed some traits that are usually um, present when somebody is exhibiting codependent type behaviors. So, some of those things are the need for fixing, helping, or rescuing others, which kind of gives you this sense of purpose and it makes you feel needed or lovable. You focus on other people and their problems and ignore your own feelings and your own needs. You may enable, right? Give unsolicited advice, nag, or be controlling. You often feel worried or anxious or guilty or ashamed, and you're self-critical. You're hyper self-critical with a lot of things, right? Almost to the point that it may come off as perfectionism, which I've talked about in my previous episodes when I mentioned the perfect relationship doesn't exist. I talk a lot about perfectionism. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I would highly recommend going back and listening to that one if you have a feeling or that you feel like you might be a perfectionist. What are some of the things, right? You feel responsible for everyone and everything. You don't have a strong sense of who you are, what you like, how you feel, or what matters to you. You're a people pleaser who will sacrifice what you want or need to avoid upsetting or disappointing other people. You have trouble setting boundaries and being assertive. Intimacy and open communication and trust are difficult for you. What else? You have difficulty asking for or accepting help. You're afraid of abandonment, criticism, and rejection, which can lead to people pleasing and a lack of boundaries and tolerating mistreatment. You're probably a hardworking person, overly responsible, and give to the point of exhaustion or resentment, right? And a lot of the times when you do that, you have a tendency of suppressing or numbing your own feelings and you absorb other people's feelings. And this usually results in having low self esteem or feeling unlovable or not good enough. And you want to feel in control and have a hard time adjusting when things don't go the way that you had planned them to go. So, just keep that in mind. When we talk about codependency or when I talk about codependency, it's really on a spectrum. And I know that I gave you a lot there. And it does not necessarily mean that you are going to identify with every single one of those. Because it's variable. It's dependent on your situation and your upbringing and your experiences and what has resulted in you starting to display codependent behavior. Now, again, let me be clear. This may also be relevant to you because you may have a partner who displays codependent behaviors. And look, what I have come to learn, particularly about the queer community, is oftentimes the people that I work with, we go one of two ways. So we are either fiercely independent and approach everything in an incredibly casual manner, which, if you ask me, I think it's kind of a defense mechanism in order to not get hurt or to not be disappointed or to not have to be vulnerable or open yourself up because maybe you've been hurt in the past or maybe you've been disappointed with your dating experiences in the queer community, whatever the case may be. And the other side of that is we become fiercely codependent on that person. When you grow up and you experience repression, suppression, discrimination, invalidation, rejection, there is this very primal need that comes about where you seek acceptance and love and affection and understanding from people that you admire, or maybe even people that you don't admire, just generally wanting that acceptance. So when you finally get into a relationship with somebody where things seem to be going well, the second things don't go according to plan, or you start to experience hiccups in the relationship, it can be very anxiety inducing because we don't want to lose this thing that we feel is very special to us. So you start to exhibit codependent behaviors. And what that actually does in the long run is it destroys the relationship, because what you do is you strip your partner of any independence or autonomy or the ability to kind of navigate their own life in the way that they choose, granted, while also including you in those decisions, because it is a relationship and therefore there has to be some kind of common ground and open discussion and goal setting and all of that. But essentially what you do is you strip your partner of their independence, and they start to feel suffocated and controlled and all of these things. And that's why you start to hear phrases like I mentioned before of, why can't you do anything on your own? Why do you need me to do that? Can't you figure this out? Because you start to rely on that person to do these things for you. And you kind of put yourself in a position where you almost come off as being helpless, or you try to do too much for them, right? And your partner doesn't need that. So codependency, as I mentioned, it's on a spectrum. So you may have some of these traits and not all of them. I've highlighted the ones that I've experienced the most in my coaching sessions with clients. So now that we have identified essentially what some of those signs are, what do you do? Right? That's the next question. How do you begin the process of overcoming codependency? Now, I want to be clear with this, right? This isn't just like a 1, 2, 3 step process and you're over it. Codependency usually stems from subjective experiences in your life that have resulted in you struggling with trust and vulnerability and self-awareness and your self-esteem and all of those things. So the need to unpack these things is going to be very important, because we can put a Band-Aid over it for the time being, but those patterns of behavior are going to come back if you actually don't get to the root of it. So what is the first thing that you can start to do? And this is self-awareness. And I talk about this a lot in a lot of my podcasts and my videos, but self-awareness is huge. Often you aren't even aware of the fact that you are codependent, because this is something that's been a part of your behavior for such a long period of time. And many psychologists would argue that codependency stems from childhood trauma. Therefore, the process of self-awareness may require a combination of things, right? It might require a combination of coaching and therapy to unpack unhealed traumas and create an action plan moving forward. So, look, regardless, acknowledging patterns of behavior that are no longer serving you, you start to realize and recognize that there are things that need to be changed. And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, because I think also the immediate assumption is, oh my God, there's something wrong with me, I must be broken. No, stop thinking that way. That's actually only further contributing and enabling that codependent behavior. You recognize there's an issue and you actively start to try and work on it. This does not mean that you're going to solve it overnight. It's step by step. They're micro steps. As long as you are taking small steps forward and making progress, that is what matters. And it will help you exponentially in the long run to build healthy, long-lasting relationships. The second thing here is setting boundaries, right? And boundaries are incredibly difficult for most people to set, let alone if you are struggling with codependency. And understanding the basics or the basic fundamentals of setting boundaries is going to be crucial when you first start. So to keep it simple and to not overwhelm you, I'll break it down to three basic steps when it comes to setting boundaries. Number one, know your limits. Become familiar with what your personal needs and expectations are. This is what the self-awareness phase is for, right? Number two, be specific. Communicate those needs and expectations clearly. It should be black and white. There shouldn't be any room for interpretation. There shouldn't be a gray area. Number three, be consistent. Stick to your boundary. Often people struggle to maintain their own boundaries, which allows others to cross them. So if you do not honor your own boundaries, you can't expect others to honor them as well. If you're stepping all over your own boundaries, you're teaching people where to walk. So don't let them walk over your boundaries by being rigid and strict with yourself when it comes to those things. And believe me, if you are somebody who identifies as a people pleaser, this is going to be really hard because you're going to feel like you're letting other people down, you're rejecting people, and that experience for you was incredibly painful, and you don't want to put that on somebody else. But there's a difference between setting a healthy boundary and being toxic, being rude, being mean, not communicating in a healthy way. And that is why these three simple steps, these three simple things to take into consideration will help you to start to set boundaries. And the other thing here, right, this doesn't have to do with the boundaries. This is part of the self-awareness and the setting boundaries portion of this is self-care. Right? Establishing self-care routines is going to be incredibly important. Why? If you are codependent or exhibit codependent behaviors, that means that you have a tendency of prioritizing everybody else and you always take the back seat. So in the long run, that is a recipe for resentment and frustration and anger and suppressed feelings. So doing things for yourself like exercising, meditating, journaling, alone time will help you to shift that mindset. It's not going to be easy in the beginning, right? But over time, you will notice a huge difference in yourself and in your relationship. So to reiterate, right, there are three primary things that you want to start doing if you recognize or you feel like you may be exhibiting codependent behaviors. The first one is making sure that you're focusing on self-awareness. The second one is setting those boundaries. And the third one is self-care. That's going to be incredibly important. So when we're talking about boundaries in particular, here are the three easy steps. Number one, know your limits. Know how far you can take it. That's one of the most important things. Number two, make sure that you are setting very clear boundaries. And number three, make sure that you are communicating clearly. I may have mixed up communicating clearly and boundaries, but you get the point. Those are the three main things when it comes to setting a boundary. Now, if this is something that you are like, I've tried this, I've done this isn't working, I'm not sure what to do, I've gone to see a therapist, they weren't very helpful, reach out. My contact information is in the description of the podcast. At least I think it is. George, is it? Right? Yeah. It should be. If not, I'll put it there, whatever. This is a reminder for me to do it if it's not there. But either way, look, reach out to me. I have multiple different social media handles. I have my TikTok, I have my Instagram, we have a website, we've got this podcast, we have YouTube. So you will find me and you can also find my contact information on any one of those things. And let's have a chat. Let's sit down. Let's talk. Let's start to unpack these things because, as queer men, gay men, bisexual men, even if you identify as lesbian, as trans, or whatever the case may be, we all deserve to feel wanted, to feel good about ourselves, to have solid self-confidence, and to have the tools and the resources to unpack these things. It's so difficult to find the resources, particularly for the queer community when it comes to mental health, which is exactly why I decided to focus on the LGBTQIA plus community and create this resource and create these tools and to create this podcast and YouTube and all of that stuff, because I didn't really have this growing up. And I wanted to make sure that I can help anybody who was feeling lost. So I say all of that to end this on this note, right? If you feel like you are displaying codependent behaviors, it doesn't mean that you'll be that way forever, number one. Number two, it's very possible that you may have experienced something that resulted in you displaying those behaviors. So don't fully blame yourself for that. A lot of people don't know how to handle somebody who is a little bit more anxious or avoidant. And as long as you're able to take a step back, take accountability, and start to work on yourself, you are on the right road. I hope you guys found this episode helpful, insightful, educational, whatever the case may be. Maybe you didn't get anything out of it. That's okay. But I hope to see you in the next episode.